Hey, what's up? Gleb Alexandrov here. Welcome to another very exciting tutorial. This video, actually more like a mini course, will show you how to use Render Raw for streamlined, artistic color grading directly within Blender. Creative Shrimp. Render Raw is a commercial add-on that essentially provides a unified colorist's panel in Blender, much like you'd find in the industry standard color correction suites like Adobe Lightroom for processing raw photos, or DaVinci Resolve for grading film footage. Obviously, color is super important for bringing out the best in your renders and giving them that extra cinematic polish. Even if your source material was already good, the color treatment is what truly makes people notice your work and go, wow, that's juicy. Color has immense power over our emotions. This is something cinematography and photography understand really well. These disciplines have spent years developing and perfecting incredibly solid toolsets designed to pull out the hidden beauty from raw photos or log footage. And that understanding led us to release our freemium Blender to Resolve course a few months back to show how Blender's color grading capabilities can be expanded with DaVinci Resolve, the software primarily for cinematographers and filmmakers. And clearly that struck a nerve among the Blender community. We're talking over 15,000 downloads and 380 5-star ratings. Clearly, we Blender artists are even willing to jump to different software for better color grading. But do we really have to jump to different software? Well, but then we discovered Render Raw, which offers a similar workflow. I mean, similar to professional color correction suites such as DaVinci Resolve, but all right inside Blender. Naturally, we at Creative Shrimp felt that it was our duty to give it a thorough test run. Color grading with Render Raw. If you like our work, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Just like any other add-on, you can install it via the user preferences, add-ons, either from this chevron or my preferred way by just dragging the file that you've downloaded from SuperHive right onto this panel and pressing OK. Then just confirm you have it installed and you're good. Upon installation, you'll find it in the right toolbar in the viewport under the Render tab, or alternatively in the Render settings under the Color Management. Just don't forget to enable it. Tick that checkbox, and then you'll see the colorist's panel with all the settings exposed for tweaking. So you can start having fun with color grading your render. That is what it takes to install it. As you can see, it's pretty easy. Or if you feel fancy, you can expand your working viewport window, hit N to bring up the toolbar, and essentially have more screen real estate to see all those color correction knobs exposed in one panel. Whichever option works best for you. I often work like that because that really feels like a dedicated color grading app. Alright, so one thing that I want to get out of the way right off the bat. What does it mean? Raw. Simply speaking, in Render Raw, Raw refers to using Blender's Raw View Transform. This basically gives the add-on access to the raw pixel data, allowing it to set up its own color grading system within the compositor, using that data. So in essence, Render Raw is this mega node that overrides Blender default color management, doing all the complex work behind the scenes as you adjust the sliders. If at any point anything is unclear, that's completely normal. Please feel free to ask any questions in the comments. It's common to get a bit confused about technical aspects of color management and other similar topics. You are among friends and colleagues here, so just ask away. So in this tutorial, we're going to pick a scene, this demon render, and go through the color grading process step by step using Render Raw. We'll learn what each slider does, but also explore the creative thinking that goes into color grading pretty much anything. This way you can apply these techniques to a variety of other scenes and shots. Plus, we'll check out some additional examples to underscore key color grading concepts and how Render Raw tools can help you achieve those beautiful, harmonious grades. And just so you know, all these demo renders are available for free download with links in the description. That way you can easily follow along and get the exact same results if you wish. So let's get started. Render Raw lets you grade a live Blender scene in real time for both Eevee and cycles. In fact, as soon as you turn it on, it sets up a few things in the compositor and configures the viewport to always preview these compositor changes in real time. This means that you don't have to worry about any of that and can just start messing with sliders, seeing the effect instantly. Alright, let's start exploring the settings we have in that colorists panel. So the first setting here is the view transform, AGX, Filmic or any other view transform available in Blender by default. Then here we have presets. By the way, I created a bunch of custom ones while testing it, and these are the built-in presets coming with the add-on. Nothing too crazy, most of them just giving a contrast boost or crunch to the image, some of them being on an extreme end as far as the contrast goes, like the slow-key photo or Polaroid presets. This one obviously imitating a lo-fi photography aesthetic. A thing about presets, these are pretty dependent on the exposure level, so adjusting the exposure makes a big difference in getting them dialed in. So these could be pretty useful, but in my opinion there's a deeper issue with starting your color grading process by slapping a preset on your footage. Those custom color grades you might have created for specific shots, a day to night grade or whatever that looked awesome in that scene and you saved it as a preset to reuse, these might not look great at all in other scenes. More often than not, it actually ends up looking pretty strange, with some colors popping a bit more than you expected, or red turning pink, or contrast getting way off, or whatever, slapping a quick grade or mood on your image like that. What worked beautifully in one shot is a disaster when applied as a quick look or mood to some other shot. Color grading usually serves a very particular purpose in each shot, going way beyond just grading for vibe or mood. What it usually does is actually applies a specific set of fixes, which is why presets simply don't work for solving the unique puzzle each shot presents. Anyway, using presets or starting from scratch, as a first thing, it's usually worth adjusting the exposure to make sure we can see everything, and it's neither too dark, not too bright at the same time. But what does it mean exactly, and how to set it right? Basically, yeah, it's best to set it so neither your shadows nor your highlights are clipped. You want to be able to see some details in both. Here, for instance, the highlights start to get clipped, and over here, it's kind of fine, but we begin losing details in the darks, especially right there. Not to mention this exposure, that's way too crunchy. As a rule of thumb, during this stage, even though exposures like that can sometimes look moody and cool, it's better to keep it on the safer side and maintain a slightly brighter level. Even if it looks a bit washed out, think of it as a base that should retain maximum information, and that's it. So this would be our preferred exposure. Again, no matter the source render, the right exposure is the one that allows to see the maximum nuance in the shapes and values. AKA, clipping is bad. Then there's this gamma slider, which, let's just say, is never supposed to be touched by mortals. There really should be a warning sign nearby. At first glance, it makes the entire image brighter or darker, but not like exposure does. It brightens or darkens it in a weird way, washing all the colors or completely crunching them. Long story short, it's not a color grading instrument. It's more of a technical setting, which, when set to 1, indicates the standard monitor transfer function. The standard means don't touch it. That's, to keep it brief and don't go into the weeds. It should be 1 at all times, okay? You might have also noticed that cycles keep restarting or refreshing the viewport rendering after tweaking either of these two settings. Either this or gamma. Gamma shouldn't be touched, by the way. Yeah, so the thing is, that's only true for these two. The rest of the settings are fine. This isn't an issue with render raw. It's just how Blender works. Next up is the contrast slider, the bread and butter of grading. It may sound strange, but actually it works really well, just brilliantly. You probably think, what? But making it work properly is trickier than it sounds. Compare it, for instance, to Vanilla Blender's default contrast node in the compositor, which is for now, look at that, it is simply broken in comparison. Look at how it clips the values. Not great, right? The Render Raw's contrast doesn't do that. It is incredibly smooth. Next, we have the controls for adjusting the black and white levels, highlights and shadows. These are those Photoshop-like controls that you'll want to use sparingly. Why so? What is it about them that deserves this heads up? Okay, something worth pointing out right away. The exposure and contrast are completely safe to use, while these other guys from this bunch are potentially more destructive and even dangerous. Why so? Why some controls are more dangerous than others? Alright, so here's the thing. It all boils down to pre- and post-grade adjustments. This is really important to get right, really important to understand. So I'm going to take a quick detour and explain what these pre- and post-adjustments are all about. Exposure, for example, is it pre or post? Exposure, for instance, is applied before view transform, before AGX in this case, in the pre-grade stage. This means it works directly on the unbound render data. And when things get really bright, the view transform still protects pixels from clipping or oversaturation. Blender's view transforms, AGX and Filmic for that matter, were designed to mimic how film emulsion reacts to light. As more light hits the film's halide crystals, the emulsion becomes increasingly desaturated and less sensitive. You can see this effect in photos and movies shot on film. This creates that smooth cinematic highlights attenuation or roll-off, preventing harsh clipping in brighter areas. So even when things get extremely bright and saturated, AGX gradually rolls it off towards white, just like real film. But again, for AGX or any other view transform to be able to do this, the color correction should happen in pre-grade or before view transform. Alright, does that make sense? Or the contrast. The contrast in Render Raw, for instance, is also applied in pre-grade or pre-image formation, allowing AGX to apply its smooth attenuation effects. But then these guys are applied post-grade, meaning that they don't have the protection of the view transform. So there's no more highlight attenuation and things get harsh really quickly. You might clip some part of the range and just lose it, and things start looking ugly. Like, look at that. Without the protective layer of AGX, we quickly drove the image toward clipping. And if there was something extremely colorful, it would have become oversaturated as well. All of that is a bit like switching AGX off and using the standard view transform, which doesn't implement any highlight or saturation roll-off. Those can also lead to colors getting collapsed into primary hues, like red, piss yellow, nuclear cyan, and so on. Ooh, my eyes. Let me switch AGX back on. The pre and post color paradigm is actually reflected in the way Render Raw is set up in Compositor. If you open the Compositor and get inside Render Raw with the Tab key, you'll notice it has a color transform block in the middle of the graph. Let's make it red. This is essentially the same as a view transform, and then some nodes come before that. These are your pre-grade nodes or pre-formation adjustments, exposure, gamma, and then some more. I'll show you the full list in a moment. And then some nodes come after, in post-formation, like RGB curves, clarity and texture, hue correct and saturation, and some post effects like grain. These post-formation nodes being potentially more troublesome. Here I prepared an infographic for you with a full list of pre- and post-formation nodes, with the later being slightly more destructive by definition, because they operate on fully formed pixels that lack the flexibility of raw rendered data. Feel free to make a screenshot. Let me drink my coffee. Here comes a caveat of the entire add-on. Any post-grade adjustments are not that different from, let's say, tweaking the knobs in Photoshop or any other image editing software, as opposed to raw data editing software. You know, the RGB pixels in the image can only get that bright and that saturated. It's not a raw data anymore, so it isn't really flexible. So why bother with the post-formation stuff then? Why play it unsafe? Why not do everything in pre-grade? So many questions. Actually, there's a reason Render Raw uses both pre- and post-picture formation color adjustments. The reason is open to scrutiny and discussion, yet the logic is this. Blender's AGX implementation is a great picture formation algorithm, and yet for some artists the saturated red and orange tones produced by AGX somehow end up looking a bit salmon, you know what I mean? And it can be a bit hard to pull off those more yellow-orangish, fiery looking tones. I admit it might seem silly, but it kind of makes sense, because personally I also prefer a more lush orangey red than that slightly desaturated pinkish salmon sort of a hue. And guess what? For many of these shots I actually ended up doing post-render color adjustments in Photoshop anyway, aka the post-formation color tweaking. And nobody died. Let's unpack that. You see, in the default Blender setup, when AGX is set by the color management panel here, then it can get pretty tricky to nudge the salmon red towards a more full-bodied orange, basically no matter what you do. You can use RGB curves, try to nudge it in this orangey direction, maybe by cranking up the green channel or whatever. But the AGX set here will always have the last word, since it sits at the end of the picture formation chain and gravitates towards certain color mixtures. You know, even shifting the hues won't help much. It'll still be fidgety and just plain hard to achieve certain tones and colors. Well, of course, instead of AGX, Filmic can be used. It is yet another view transform of Blender, and indeed its rendition of highly saturated, hot pixels is completely different. Much more on a saturated, orangey side of things. So yeah, that could work. But then AGX has much better, smoother highlights attenuation compared to Filmic. Filmic, unfortunately, has a nasty tendency to collapse saturated colors into evil primaries, aka nuclear cyan, red, piss yellow, magenta from hell, and so on. And AGX is a bit salmon. It's a conundrum, so what can we do? Here's the trick, and once again, here's why the plugin has RAW in its name. Instead of AGX, we can select RAW here. This means no view transform, hence the colors will look broken right away, as no view transform is applied just yet. Incidentally, that's exactly how OpenEXR footage would look in Resolve, before applying any color space transform. Back in Blender, there's a node within the compositor called Convert Color Space. And that is how we can set up the view transform ourselves. We simply convert it from the raw linear rec 709, that's the color space that Blender uses internally for rendering, and we convert it into AGX base sRGB, and that would look exactly the same as using AGX from within this panel. But now we can choose where to place the corrections. Like, we can apply some nodes after the view transform, and some before. Like, the exposure goes before, in pre-formation, because it needs the full render data to work properly. And then after the image has been fully formed, we can nudge some colors towards that orange, and do it extremely carefully to not push them over the edge. Yes, it is pretty destructive, but at least we can do it now. You see where I'm going? So that's the whole point of the RAW workflow, to have that choice and that flexibility. It's just important to know what you're doing, and that's it. Here you can see a comparison of Vanilla Blender's AGX versus AGX plus some post-formation grade applied on top of it. You see how it helped us to correct the salmon-looking reds? Hopefully it's pretty clear now why Render Raw uses both pre- and post-adjustments. To do exactly that and more. That method of doing it is alright, the way Render Raw uses some post-picture formation effects and adjustments, yet just to mention it, the alternative to using some of the post-formation tweaks is to just use a different view transform altogether. Aside from AGX and Filmic, there are many other pretty amazing transforms like AGX Kraken, JZDT, OpenDRT, 2499 and more. Some of them don't have that salmon tint to begin with. We cover this in our freemium Blender to Resolve course, if you want to learn more about it. Just a quick off-topic note, if you are familiar with Pixel Manager and how to expand default Blender's view transforms using all the custom ones generously shared by Joe Genko, you'll be happy to hear that Render Raw supports those too. We won't go too deep into that here since it's a bit more advanced, but just know that Render Raw does support custom view transforms. Let me know in the comments if you want me to unpack that in some other video. Anyway, the philosophy behind Render Raw is to use both pre- and post-formation adjustments, as this gives us more freedom when it comes to pushing colors to their limits. Feel free to pause this video to allow yourself to decompress or rewatch certain things at your own pace. I keep saying that when working with digital color, that stuff can be confusing as hell. And the long but necessary detour into how RenderRaw works has ended. Now let's get back on track with color grading our daemon. As a quick reminder, first we've set the exposure and contrast, so everything's nice and visible, and not too crunched at the moment. And not too washed out either. Now we can also lift the highlights a touch. Just a little bit. And head over to details. If you've used Lightroom before, you might recognize these controls. These adjustments, by the way, are local, meaning they aren't working on all pixels equally. Okay, sharpness increases the perceived sharpness by emphasizing the edges of things. As a rule of thumb, I usually try not to overuse it, otherwise it could look like an old VHS footage or something. Just a little bit of that. At any point, we can toggle this checkbox to compare before and after. Now, sharpness can be masked, which allows us to protect smoother areas like skin and out-of-focus backgrounds from sharpening, applying these effects only to the areas with well-defined edges. So that's pretty cool. Texture is also kind of sharpening, but it specifically targets medium-frequency details. It brings out subtle elements like pores in skin, yeah. Then clarity creates a hazy effect when negative, or on the contrary, makes details pop when positive. Again, this effect is local, meaning it can create halos and similar artifacts, and can even add an almost HDR-like feel. I mean, like bad HDR photos. So it should be used sparingly. All in all, after the basic adjustments, it should look way more punchy now, right? The sharpening settings in RenderRaw are inspired by the presence sliders in Lightroom, designed for bringing out the higher frequency detail in RAW photos. And also by the mid-range detail adjustments in Resolve, as far as I can tell. Before we go any further, it's worth noting that if the lighting in your scene was already okay, these basic values adjustments can already make your render look quite good. That's not necessarily the case here, as I still want to explore certain color direction for this image as far as the color harmony goes, but sometimes basic adjustments is all you need. Anyway, as I've said, there are places I want to take this image still, and explore the rest of RenderRaw for that matter, so... There are two types of RGB curves in RenderRaw, pre and post, and you already know what that means, right? Pre means it's applied before the display transform, allowing for a bit more leeway. And post means after. The same as using RGB curves in Photoshop on top of an exported PNG. Basically the same thing. With curves we can do a lot of fun stuff, but here I'll crank up the greens in the brighter areas and reduce it in the darker areas. As I've mentioned, it's literally the same as exporting your image and tweaking it in an image editing app like Photopea. I mean, applying the post curves or any such adjustment. If you've ever worked in Photoshop or similar applications, it should look familiar to you. A lot of interesting things can be done by applying RGB curves to any image, especially by adjusting the individual RGB channels. That's classic stuff, really. So I think we're good, applying a little bit of a hump to the green channel brights. Maybe I'll lift the blue one a bit too, to see how it looks. Actually, I like how it looks when everything gets cooled down a touch. Now onto the colors tab. Many interesting things wait for us there. Let's talk about saturation first. Saturation is obviously how intense and pure the colors are. It can be used to desaturate everything like that, to give it a bleach bypass. But the thing about saturation algorithm is that when you reduce saturation, it leads to the entire image losing its colorfulness in, you can say, a perceptually uniform way. Like the whole image starts to look faded and muted. But then there's another, more nuanced saturation control called color boost. Look how upon bringing it down, the image still loses its juiciness, but what was really colorful to begin with still retains its vibrancy. Actually, let me reduce the bluish tint in the curves so we can see it better. And green tint as well, to make it more neutral. Yeah, look at how most of the image has lost its colorfulness, leaving only the blood red gums or lips, whatever it is, intact. That is super useful for emphasizing certain things within the image. I usually use it in the context of desaturation, as it helps to make brighter colors pop. and not by increasing their intensity. That's not that useful, but by toning down the surrounding saturation, let's put it like that. That is probably my favorite feature of Render Raw. To drive it home, here's one more comparison of saturation versus color boost using the Fox EXR animation by Daniel Bystad. Let's jump to Resolve, as these controls are inspired by Resolve. So saturation has a stronger effect on the areas that were already saturated, like these red spots. Color boost, on the other hand, mostly affects the areas that were not saturated to begin with, so it's like it's inversely proportional to their saturation. That makes saturation a bit more dangerous when trying to increase the overall colorfulness, as the already saturated parts will be the first to hit oversaturation, since the effect is strongest on them. Color boost is a bit more forgiving. Look how it first lifts the background vibrancy and doesn't drive the red parts over the saturation threshold as easily. That's very useful indeed. To sum it up, these algorithms, saturation and color boosts, behave quite differently. Color boost being slightly more nuanced, but both are useful in different situations. To make it clear, the Resolve's color boost slider can be recreated in Vanilla Blender. Render Raw doesn't rely on any external libraries for that, but I like how Render Raw makes it so much easier for us. To be fair, some sliders like Perceptual Saturation are a bit more tricky to recreate on their own. The concept of Perceptual Saturation is an interesting one. Imagine you have two spheres, one blue, one yellow. The blue one looks perceptually darker, right? But if Perceptual Slider is at 0, a simple hue saturation value conversion will be used. And when you desaturate, that means it just averages out their values. The thing is, our eyes expect blue to appear darker than yellow. Even if it physically emits the equal amount of energy, blue has to be darker. That's where the Perceptual Slider comes in. It switches Render Raw to use a different algorithm, OKLab instead of HSV. So saturation adjustments match what we humans would actually expect, taking into account luminance or subjective brightness of all colors. Pretty cool, right? And yeah, recreating that slider yourself in Blender is a fair bit trickier, mostly because of the YUV color model involved. It's not impossible, just a bit hard to wrap your head around. It's great that Render Raw gives us these tools right out of the box. The more options our colorists have in their toolbox, the better, I guess. You might not use every single one, but some of them, like Color Boost, are genuinely useful. I use that one all the time, they're really good to have. Usually I try not to crank up saturation too much. Maybe just a touch. Then we've got the temperature slider for adjusting the warmth or coolness of your image along the blue-yellow axis. Not that we didn't have that in Vanilla Blender, but here it is integrated with the rest of the controls for the ease of use. In the current versions of Blender, alternatively it can be adjusted from within the color management tab though, the temperature in kelvins, and the tint, which works along the green-magenta axis. A minor difference is that in Render Raw the default maximum of temperature is a bit higher, so you can push it a bit further for a more dramatic effect. But that's pretty much it. What I'm looking for when changing temperature is... what am I looking for, really? I guess I'm trying to see what makes the primary object of interest pop a bit more. Maybe finding new contrasts, maybe by nudging the tints towards green. I'm starting to think that might help create an interesting complementary contrast of blood red and vile green. Something like that. By the way, these sliders have also their own perceptual mode, which is set to 1 by default. I like the sort of rotten, vile atmosphere the greenish tint and cooler temperature gave to this shot. It's just slightly more disgusting, which is lovely. It's an idea that I've got just a moment ago, you see. That's why color grading can be so rewarding. Sometimes you just stumble across these ideas on the fly. This red and green color harmony, that's a classic complementary contrast, by the way. The colors in complementary contrasts sit on the opposite sides of the color wheel, which generally makes it easy on the eyes, so why not? This website, by the way, is Adobe Color, if you want to know. One of the main motivations behind color correction is to bring out some kind of color harmony from chaos. It doesn't have to be super complex either. Simple analogous harmonies, just a few colors sitting next to each other on the color wheel can look great. Or even straight up monochromatic palettes with one color accent and some variation in hue and saturation. Often that's all you need. And of course complementary harmonies work great too. Red and green, teal and orange, that kind of thing. I wouldn't rush into split complementary, compound or other more complex types, especially if you're just getting into color grading. Complementary, monochromatic and analogous. Those are easier to work with and honestly they can look just as good. Also, color is somewhat paradoxical. On one hand, highly saturated colors are what grab the viewer's eye more than anything else. Color is strong, right? But then the tonal contrast, the balance between light and dark, is probably just as important, if not more, to get it right. So everything reads well, your objects stand out from the background, the lighting is good, and so on. So yeah, the color harmony is important, and the bright color specifically is the first thing we see, yet nailing the tonal contrast is equally, if not more important. It's kind of a paradox. The next tab to explore is color balance. It gives you two sets of controls, offset power slope and lift gamma gain. The main difference is that offset power slope work before display transform, while lift gamma gain after, so you could say it's a bit more destructive. But either way, these are our classic color correction tools for adjusting shadows, midtones and highlights. Lift is for shadows, which you can tint however you like, gamma for midtones mainly, and gain for highlights mainly. Offset power slope follow the same basic idea. Offset can be used to lift the floor a little bit or give it a certain color cast. A classic use case, to give shadows a cooler tint, to create a teal versus orange color harmony. Then midtones, maybe we can add a bit of cooler color to it as well and push it towards green. And the highlights, a warmer color instead, more towards orange for that cold versus warm cinematic vibe. That's just one example of how you can play with it, obviously. These color wheels are probably one of the most fundamental and classic tools for primary color grading across basically all professional color correction suites. Personally, I still like the tactile feel in Resolve a bit better than what we have in Blender and in Render Raw for that matter. But hey, Render Raw's color wheels definitely get the job done. I'll right-click these fields and reset them to their default values for now. Next, let's take a look at the per hue adjustments. Basically, this panel. Here we can isolate a particular range of colors, like reds, and do something about them. Make all the reds lean more towards purple or towards yellow on the other hand, or whatever you want. Or we can bump up or tone down the saturation of just that hue range. Or make it brighter or darker within the value tab. Actually, the concept of making a certain color range darker while boosting its saturation is often called density. In color grading, density means adding richness and depth without pushing things into oversaturation. Let's jump into Resolve for a moment so we can see how density works there. The thing is, if we just blindly crank up saturation on something that's already pretty saturated, it can easily lead to oversaturation or clipping. What we can do instead is increase, density, to add richness to the reds, giving them that heavier, deeper feel. Whoopsie, actually I was tweaking the entire image density. Here is just the density of the red range and its saturation. Hopefully you can see what that does. Let's talk about Render Raw's features and some of the feedback behind them. In the first draft of this video I sent to Jonathan Lempel, the creator of the add-on, I mentioned how cool it would be to have a density control for color right inside Blender. That's basically what I said. We don't have a slider for density in Render Raw just yet. But hey, maybe if you mention it in the comments, Jonathan will take note. I know he's super responsive to feedback. And guess what? Density just got added to Render Raw. Jonathan quickly prototyped this feature for Blender, and it just works. It enriches the color tones without pushing them into that oversaturated look. Now, to be fair, it's still an experimental feature for now, but it's definitely going to be improved and expanded over time. Alright, back to our monster. Okay, do I want to push it more towards purple, perhaps? Making it look like a berry syrup? Or is toxic yellow the way to go? I don't know. Well, maybe it was repelling enough as is. Okay, what about messing with saturation? Actually, I think I want to brighten it up to give it a fresher, more lively feel. Yeah, and create a stronger focal point around the lips. Something like that. You see, in color correction, every tweak is there for a reason, ideally. Like, oh hey, this area around the lips, or this range of colors, or this skin tone, it has to be nudged into certain direction ever so slightly. You know, it's usually really particular in color grading in general. The post-formation issues. One thing that I wanted to mention about the per hue adjustments in Render Raw is that it is a post-formation tweak, meaning it works on a limited set of data and sometimes it can stretch that data a bit too far. Sometimes you may end up seeing these abrupt transitions between color ranges. Nasty stuff. It very much depends on specific hues and so on. That being said, it is still super useful, don't get me wrong, but it's not perfect in its current form, something worth keeping in mind. Compared to Resolve for that matter, which is kind of the gold standard. The hue versus hue curves in Resolve, especially when working in a logarithmic color space, tend to be a bit more reliable for sweeping hue adjustments. Maybe it's due to the fact that in Resolve we usually use larger color spaces like DaVinci Wide Gamut instead of much smaller X709. Maybe that's the case. Anyway, that's just something to keep in mind, I guess. For certain things, there's still space for improvement in Render Raw. It's good to know that support for logarithmic color space controls is definitely on the add-ons roadmap. Who knows, by the time you're watching this, it might already be there. But let's use the future tense for now. It will be there. Okay, besides the per hue, there are also per value adjustments. The saturation for each value range, shadows, midtones, and highlights. It's pretty straightforward what each slider does. Essentially, it's an easy way to adjust how colorful each tone range is. Thinking of it, it's a little bit like Color Boost, giving you more nuanced control over what exactly do you want to saturate or desaturate, the shadowy areas in this case. Yeah, personally I find that desaturating shadows often looks really cool, like out of the box. That's just one of the examples, obviously. I don't think I want to use it for that particular shot though. Next up, let's have a look at the color mode. It is yet another way to tint a specific luminosity range. Again, to push the shadows, for instance, toward cooler tones. You know, I just can't think of anything else, apparently. Yeah, the Hollywood cinema vibe. The warmer or greenish highlights to give it a mysterious feel. Like, ooh, something exotic and alien is happening. Cool. To be honest, that was pretty good already, but I think that this per value colorization pass gives it more like a classic blockbuster grade feel, with richer color separation, a slightly more stylized quote-unquote cinematic grading. You know what I mean? I don't want to overthink it, it's just a bit punchier and that's it. This technique is great for doing what's called split toning, applying different color tints separately to the highlights and the shadows of an image. And the per value saturation is something that I use a lot for creating this stylized effect, where the image is mostly drained of color, except for the lights, for instance. I use it all the time. I call it different things like color isolation or color pop. I even baked a bunch of loots for Resolve that use this effect, and honestly I think it looks pretty stylish. By the way, you can download these loots for free if you want. Google Creative Shrimp Loot Pack. In the context of our daemon, it could give it this kind of a look, chromatic light and achromatic shadows. I don't want to go in that direction here though. Alright, exploring the rest of the settings, there's a slider called Filmic. It lets us blend between AGX, or whatever transform is chosen, and Filmic, which is amazing. That said, in this particular case, the difference is a bit subtle, hard to grasp, so let's check a different example. Fire! Here we've got AGX selected as our view transform, or some people call it tone mapping. And then in the tone mapping tab, what we can do is crank up the Filmic slider to blend between the AGX and Filmic primaries, diluting that salmon red with the more saturated orangey tones of Filmic. We can go all the way to 1, and just to be clear, value of 1 in this slider will essentially replace the AGX look with just Filmic. It's like fully switching to Filmic. Or if you want to add just a little of that influence, you can go halfway, for instance. Whatever feels right to you. Pretty cool, right? And then also the sRGB hue option returns the colors to their original sRGB hue after the transform, which can be handy to counteract the tone mapping influence. Hopefully you can see it here. But I don't want to use it here. What can you do? And this slider returns the colors to their original sRGB saturation, ignoring the film emulsion-like softening of intense colors. It should be used with caution though, but it's pretty cool to have that option for adding some extra punch where needed. Then the highlight cutoff controls the maximum value to allow to mix, zeroing it out completely, so then you can dial in the perfect mix factor. Higher values will reduce the highlights roll-off, which again is something to watch out for. And it can make the image look a bit flat and oversaturated. I think the default color setting, what was it, 4, was pretty good. The spread is another way to control the highlights roll-off, whether you want more or less of that in your tone mapping. All in all, that's a fantastic panel. Fantastic. It offers a ton of flexibility and I love it. I've never seen it in a color grading add-on before, so that's really, really cool. Effects. Okay, time for effects. Lens distortion is just that. Just good old lens distortion. Dispersion adds some chromatic aberration, imitating that famous lens defect, one that photographers both love and hate. In addition to radial dispersion or chromatic aberration, there's the horizontal mode, available in Blender 2.5 and later versions only. It creates a subtle, colorful fringing near the edges. By the way, something that needs to be mentioned explicitly, you can always use the compositor to add custom effects or whatever you want to add to your RenderRaw setup. You know, just because it's not built in, it doesn't mean we can't add our own stuff. For example, you can just drop in another lens distortion node and tweak it however you like. Or any other node you want. Hue saturation, for instance. Swoosh. And we've got a nice black and white shot. You get the idea. The RenderRaw glare is one of the nicest I've seen among similar add-ons and tools. It combines the regular fog glare, for which we can tweak the intensity, obviously, and then the fog glare, the bloom, and the streaking. And it just works and it looks great. I love this old school streaking. The ghosting isn't particularly useful though. It's still that awkward Blender ghosting that's pretty much unusable at the moment, to be honest. But like I've said, I'm a big fan of the streaking and bloom effects though. Then I have a soft spot for that film-like vignette. You know, the darkening near the edges. And then, of course, I'm also a huge fan of film grain. I pretty much use both of these effects all the time in my renders, but especially the film grain. And I have to say the RenderRaw implementation of film grain is pretty solid. It has a bunch of extra settings, like switching the method to accurate, which should produce a slightly more realistic grain effect, displacing the image differently per color channel. Then the scale, affecting the granularity of that noise. When it's large like that, we can see the per channel displacement effect pretty clearly. Next, whether to add color variation to it. It's hard to see here. Basically this. And there is also the steps setting that adjusts the complexity of the noise pattern, which may not seem like a big deal, but it does affect the clumping and just the character of the noise, giving you that extra bit of control. Lastly, upon ticking that animate checkbox, the pattern now should change every frame. Again, you can see the per channel color displacement effect here a bit more clearly. All these extras though, and even the basic film grain implementation comes at a cost. You can definitely feel it's getting a little laggy when both effects are on, but oh man, it's so worth it. A few more words about Vignette, because it deserves it. It's a really well done effect. Pretty customizable and thoughtfully designed. Beside the usual stuff like the mix factor, which is just the opacity of the vignette, you can also change the color of it, so you can tint it however you want. You can give it a greenish tint to make it more disgusting. You can do that. There's also an option to preserve the original colors underneath, and even preserve the highlights, letting them punch through the darkening effect. The little details like that can really make a difference. Then we can control the feathering, and obviously tweaking the shape, roundness, rotation and other parameters is a total breeze. You can basically turn it into a power window and target it exactly where you want. Again, I should mention it might cause a slight performance hit, since it's a pretty heavy effect, but it's a great one anyway. Lastly, a few important things about RenderRaw, so don't skip this, if only for a quick break. These longer videos can get a bit exhausting sometimes, I know. So, you know what, maybe take a break and then get back if you feel like you're exhausted. Performance. While RenderRaw works in real time in the viewport, once you hit render and your frame finishes rendering, it won't work in real time anymore, because Blender's compositor slows down a lot for the final render. That is, if you're using CPU for calculating the compositing effects. I'll show you in a moment where to find it and how to change it. Maybe it will get fixed at some point, but right now in Blender 4.5, any change to any setting after that means the compositor has to recalculate everything. And on CPU, it's painfully slow. I tell you, I can easily brew myself a cup of coffee in between tweaks, but only when we talk about CPU. Now, if you have a reasonable GPU, then what you can do is come over to Utilities, the Compositor section, and just switch it the hell over to GPU instead. Then all compositing will be transferred to GPU, which is much faster generally. Like, maybe still not real-time, technically speaking, but pretty fluid and responsive. Definitely 100 times faster than CPU, at least on my computer. That being said, in some cases though, it can still feel a bit too laggy depending on the effects you've used and the video card you have. And then we are talking about baking your render. So if you want that super fluid color grading experience like you're working in a dedicated color correction applications, so what you can do is disable Render Raw and save your rendered image as OpenEXR file, which will hold all the info you need for color grading. Half float and DWAA compression if you want to save some space without losing much quality. Actually, it will take less space than a PNG. And then just save it. Then in a fresh Blender file, create a plane with the same aspect ratio as your saved image. 1.92 by 1.08. Next, add a camera and point it at the plane, which will act as our image display. Finally, create a material for that plane. Basically, just plug that exported EXR image straight into the shader. And once you switch to rendered mode, you'll be able to see your EXR right there. That is how you can bake your render and dive into color grading your shot exactly how you want, no second guessing, and with the best performance possible. As far as color grading feel goes, this setup almost turns Blender with Render Raw into a dedicated color grading suite. That probably sounds a bit like an over-exaggeration, but that's how it genuinely feels to me. You know, I don't want to oversell it. It's still not Lightroom and not Resolve, it's still Blender, but the feel is definitely there, and it feels empowering. Again, this is my personal opinion, not influenced by anything. In fact, all our opinions are our own. Okay, that's our result. And I hope you found this overview of color grading with Render Raw useful. Hopefully it will help you to level up your color grading game in Blender, so you can pull out that hidden beauty out of your raw renders and build a cinematic looking portfolio. If you found this video interesting, I would appreciate if you can give this video a like and subscribe to our channel on YouTube. You know, YouTube makes it tough to reach viewers these days, so your support means a lot. Of course, our affiliate link to Render Raw is also in the description. That was me, Gleb Alexandrov for CreativeShrimp.com, bringing you all kinds of tutorials to help you express yourself with computer graphics like never before.